Again, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants. Well, my name is Kim Do-yeon, President of University of Ulsan, and it is great pleasure for me to serve as a moderator of this session. Well, in this session, we will talk and discuss about the future and education. And as we all are aware, the future is really unpredictable. Although we can't predict it, we know that we will have many difficult problems in our future. Well, globalization, climate change, energy problem, water and food shortage, etc. Well, we are even at this stage worrying about sustainability, human sustainability itself. Well, therefore, for our future, we need further innovation and we need talented people. That's why we will talking about the next generation and education in this session. Well, we have for this session 4 distinguished speakers, really the experts and specialists on this subject. Let me introduce them. The first speaker comes from Switzerland, Dr. Luc Weber. He was the president of University, Geneva University, and currently working as a president of emeritus president of Geneva University, as well as president of Guillon, okay, Guillon Association. And the second speaker is from USA, President Dan Mott, President University of Maryland. And the third speaker is Tang, who is the Assistant Director General for Education of UNESCO. And the last speaker is Ms. Elizabeth King, who is Education Director for the World Bank. So in total, we have 80 minutes, as you know. So I will provide them each one about 17 or 18 minutes. Okay. Okay. Let us have first speaker, President Luc Weber.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's really wonderful for me to be here, and I'm very grateful to the organizer having invited me to such an important meeting. As a former university president, I'd like to share with you a few thoughts about workers and leaders in the 21st century, and mainly about the role of universities. As you all know, the world has entered an era of profound change, with major consequences for society, the economy, and the labor market, as well as for politics and education. The consequences, both for working people and leaders of the 21st century, and for the role of education, in particular for education, will be at the center of my presentation. My presentation will be divided in 4 sections, basically 4 messages. The first set of message is about the fast-changing environment of human activities. As you know, the world is changing at an increasingly faster pace. There are diverging demographic trends in uninterrupted demographic growth throughout the world, apart from the Western world, Japan and Korea, which are aging. Globalization is playing an extremely important role. There are 2 roots, political ones, the end of the Cold War, the implosion of the USSR, but also globalization is, we see globalization in the economic development mainly through freer trade. We assist to a breathtaking scientific and technological progress. We have entered into the knowledge economy, I prefer to say the knowledge society. We also assist at a large transfer of industrial production to the new emerging economic powers, which are basing their power on cheap labor as well as on the capacity to innovate. The service economy has become the main source of added value in the West. Economic activities are challenging planet Earth and the living conditions of its inhabitants in terms of climate, energy, and natural resources. Moreover, health is threatened by new illnesses. Due to ideological sheer monopolization of power or anarchy, many countries, too many countries, are also acting against modernization and are at the root of many tensions or regional conflicts. What are the consequences of these developments? Societies, nations, business, and individuals are confronted both with increasing competition. Getting or keeping a position requires being better, and in the West, also working harder. Second, continuous change. We are moving into an environment where the most stable element is change. The long-term sustainability of development trends and policies has become a priority. Today, sustainability has not only, as for the last 30 or 40 years, a material, or if you prefer, natural component, environment, climate, exploitation of natural resources, but also a human and societal one, geopolitical, economic, financial, and social. Education, and in particular higher education and research, are doubly at the center of the change process. They largely contribute to the change in creating new knowledge, thanks to fundamental and applied research, disseminating acquired and new knowledge, thanks to teaching and learning. Higher education institutions are also seriously challenged by the change and its speed. They should adapt faster to respond to new needs, but the heavy burden of the human factor and of their governance and organization system make them slow to adapt, in particular with respect to teaching and learning. They are also losing their monopoly as single provider of knowledge, in particular due to distance learning, in-house training programs of firms, and of course, internet. The nature of knowledge is changing, less encyclopedic, more specialized and interactive. My second set of messages, the profile of workers and of the leaders of tomorrow. The fast-changing environment is deeply transforming the workplace, as well, and it's also extremely important, in the lives of ordinary citizens. Working people, unskilled, specialists and leaders are confronted with increasing complexity. Doing a job well, whatever the level of qualification required, demands better knowledge and professionalism. Paradoxically, although professional and management tools are better and more user-friendly, complexity comes from the fact that one wants to do more. Second point is change. The changing manner of doing a job, as well as the quasi-permanent restructuring of the working environment, require everyone to accept change, and even better, to contribute to change. The consequences that the labor market expects from all working people, not only professional qualification, but also personal, or if you prefer, generic skills. Let us start with the professional qualification in the knowledge economy. They depend largely from the level of development and the type of economy. Is it an industrial or more service-oriented economy? Experience shows that it is difficult to plan the supply of different types of qualification, mainly due to the long time lag between a policy decision to change and the availability of new qualifications. Engineers are indeed strongly demanded in modern economies, in particular industrial ones. However, scientists are also needed, as it is not possible to apply something which has not been discovered. Social sciences and humanities must either not be neglected. An economy and society which rely heavily on scientists and engineers also need social scientists and men and women of the liberal profession and arts to integrate science and technology in business and in society, and also to contribute to the homogeneity of society. Post-industrial economies like the United States or Western Europe one need a greater variety of professional skills, often at the border of traditional disciplines. Second, the personal or generic skills. There is a necessity for almost every workers, even unskilled ones, to work independently, and increasingly the future to work away from an office environment, for example at home, to interact positively with others, to be ready to question yourself, to adapt to a continuously changing environment, and also ready to change job many times in a career. For specialists and leaders, in addition to this prerequisite knowledge, they have to be highly professional, take initiatives, be innovative and proactive, or dynamic if you prefer. To have a genuine natural authority, to go beyond provincialism and become really international, which includes being able to work in 2 or more languages, to hold values indispensable for sustainability, ethical, respect for others, including the family, a building stone of society. Young and old are not in an equal position when faced with the change process, in particular the IT revolution, which is dramatically changing the way we work and communicate. All people have to work hard not to be dropped. Young people learn part of IT while playing, but are increasingly cut off from the values and tradition transferred by the family and at school. The change process is creating also an imbalance between demand and supply of labor. Many businesses have difficulties recruiting qualified people, but at the same time, well-qualified graduates don't find a job corresponding to their qualification. There is so many dentists being taxi driver. It's really terrible. This double phenomenon is due to at least 2 factors. Rigidities in higher education institutions in providing enough graduates with required new profiles, and in business in introducing new products, new services, new processes requiring these new profiles. Insufficient internationalization or mobility is also a reason. More labor mobility in and outwards can partly compensate for national imbalances. It's what the EU is trying to do. A third set of messages is about the challenges for teaching and learning. The changing environment and requirement of the labor market are challenging teaching and learning on many levels. In particular, it would be an illusion at university level, certainly, to try transferring to students all the existing scientific and scholarly knowledge. Therefore, students should learn how to learn and be prepared to learn throughout their lives. be encouraged to be critical, curious, and to search for information and solutions by themselves. That's really trained by giving them a research spirit and the methodology of research. They should be given enough freedom to choose among different courses according to their curiosity, as it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to know what will be most needed in 10 years' time. Students should be also confronted with research as well as interdisciplinarity. Mathematics, which is extremely important, but should not be erected as a single filter of selection, but developed according to the use made in a discipline. Moreover, higher education programs should promote personal generic skills and societal values, need for sustainability, ethics, we heard this morning also, honesty, obey the rule of law, intercultural tolerance, engagement. The respective teaching and training roles of higher education institutions and business or administration should not be mixed up. Higher education institutions are far better equipped to train brains, that is, to teach general principles and how to learn. They shouldn't be forced to produce graduates who are immediately profitable in a working environment. The responsibility of preparing graduates for the working environment and for the activities of the specific organization belongs to firms and to public administration. But both are responsible for promoting and offering lifelong learning to maintain the employability of working people. My 4 sets of messages are about the challenges for the education and higher education systems. The entire education and research system must, like any other institution, adapt to the changing environment. This implies reforms, often major ones, in many countries. It is important to think in terms of systems. The system should be coherent from primary school onwards and should offer serious alternatives to the upper secondary university channels, what we call, and we have in Germany and Switzerland, the system of apprenticeship. A well-balanced system has various types of institutions responding to different needs, from vocational 2-3 years colleges to a few, depending on the size of the country, research-intensive universities. To organize that, you need some sort of master plan like California did 40 years ago, or more or less. The permeability of the system is extremely important. Students should be able to move from one type of institution to another according to their merit and performance. And then, by way of conclusion, making sure the higher education and research sector prepares workers and leaders for tomorrow depends on many factors, obviously. In my view, the 2 most important ones are the human resource development. It is essential to attach the highest priority to human resources in the education sector. The new generation of graduates and instructors depend strongly on them. This is unfortunately a serious constraint in developing countries which are beginning to develop their higher education sector. Modernization of the higher education system and higher education institutions is also extremely important. One should establish a rigorous and impartial analysis of the future requirements of the labor market and society. We should have a firm willingness to change and a real capacity to convince people, because those inside the system are very, very conservative and prone to defend their territory or interests. And I strongly believe that incentives are much better than coercion. One should also guarantee the autonomy of institutions to make sure they are motivated to move forward, which doesn't exempt them from the requirement to be accountable and responsible. The alternative of an enlightened political commander-in-chief is possible, but rare. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President Luke Weaver. Thank you for your points about the leadership for the 21st century and the role of universities. Well, now let us move to next speaker, President Dan Mott. Well, he's also going to talk about the leadership and the role of universities.
Thank you very much. I wish to thank the organizers of the Global HR Forum 2010 for this opportunity to speak about the next generation leadership of universities. Leadership of the university, of course, is the primary responsibility of its president. The president sets the direction for the university, expressed in a vision that commits the institutional responsibilities, it proclaims its many values to society, capitalizes on its opportunities, and uses its resources most effectively. But the stakes in the selection of university president are becoming ever taller, for this world is experiencing waves of accelerating changes on many fronts, as we had earlier. I agree completely with Dr. Weber. Technology, environment, security, energy, just to name a few. The research universities stand on the curl of these waves. Today, the strategic vision for university is reshaped regularly as its underpinning responsibilities, opportunities, and challenges change. For instance, consider none of the top 10 U.S. employment opportunities in 2010 even existed in 2004. The elevating role of universities in society requires their visions to recognize and work with changing societal realities. One societal reality is that talent, especially talent in high demand, as we heard earlier, is the coin of the global realm. So a national workforce with a first-class higher education is sought after essentially everywhere. University presidents and other leaders are expected to be prescient in adapting their visions to impending change. To be reactive to change is to be buffered constantly. But universities are often snared by their cultures and processes and respond more slowly than our volatile world changes. However, we should continue to expect combinations of global connectivity and accelerating change will cause abrupt disruptions that will challenge us, our adaptation constantly. This reality calls for new processes that provide the agility universities need to respond. Well, predicting the future is a futile process. John Pierce of Bell Laboratories remarked that the trouble with the future is that there are so many of them, and that's true. However, Oliver Wendell Holmes advised that we can step above predicting the future when he said, "The great thing in this world is not so much where we stand as in what direction we are moving." He didn't say where we are moving, only in what direction we are moving. So while predicting the future will miss both its details and its anomalies, the direction we are heading is clear because we are already traveling down that road. The global megatrends do tell us the direction we are heading, at least at present. And some megatrends are critical enablers, like the internet and global communications, and others are outcomes of those enablers, like globalization of industry, people, and universities. But they counsel the next generation leadership about the issues that the university vision should consider. The impact of megatrends on the vision depends on the university mission, say as a research university, a comprehensive university, a liberal arts college, or a vocational university, or some other. The research universities with global footprints are most influenced by the megatrends of globalization because their missions are intertwined with these trends. Let's highlight global megatrends to see the relevance to the vision for a research university. First, accessible and inexpensive global communications. Access to nearly instant communications in both the developed and developing world is a disruptive technological change that defines modernization. It has opened opportunities for business, people, governments, and universities alike. Every young person in the United States sends 100 text messages each day. 1/3 of the world population has fast internet access. And there are more cellular phones in the world than there are people. And university networks are among the largest, most open, and intensively connected globally. Knowledge and information on university networks moves freely throughout the world. Next, partnerships and engagement. International relationships during the Cold War, 1945 to 1990, were characterized by isolation and control of information and technology for national advantage. Innovation and control underpinned national policies that shaped international relations and access to information throughout the world. However, between 1990 and 2000, in an almost complete reversal in paradigm, innovation control was replaced by innovation creation through partnerships and engagement. Global communications and globalization after the Cold War ended made control of innovation no longer possible except in a limited circumstance. So being first became the best strategy than being left out entirely. Partnerships and engagement to accelerate innovation is the basis of relationships today, whether we speak of countries or companies, of universities or students. The assembly of talent, resources, and capabilities to accelerate getting things done quickly is the driver. Universities must engage, must have impact, and must do it today. Today's students want to do it themselves or do it together. We heard that in the last presentation. We see that all over the world. Do it themselves or do it together. Partnerships and engagement characterize this period we're in. Globalization. It embraces people, universities, and countries well beyond its initial focus on business models. Globalization brings together people who create new, often unanticipated value by being connected to each other. Globalization delivers both expected trickle-down results derived from sources outside a country and unexpected trickle-up values emanating from inside it. Increasing numbers of countries are expanding their global competitiveness and attending to global issues like environmental degradation, natural resource protection, pandemics, and so forth. Essentially, all business is globalized. Corporations either view the world, a world without borders, national borders, where markets, talent, finance, etc. Are distributed globally, or they form multinational entities and subsidiary companies, each serving a set of different masters. Research universities must engage globally, like government sometimes, and like business sometimes, to nurture talent, lead in research, serve in the global community. For a research university to not engage globally is to be left behind. Expanding opportunities in higher education. Global access to education has grown significantly and continues, with all countries setting targets for growth in higher education. Modernization, growth of the middle class, the drive to participate in technology-driven economies have driven growth in the developing and developed countries alike. President Obama has set a goal to increase graduation rates at U.S. universities by more than 25% by 2020. Let's see. I'm afraid I have possibly missed one. Excuse me a second. And that's the one I should be on. Sorry about that. Apologize. Talent. As Sir Francis Bacon said, knowledge is power, and new knowledge derived from research and advanced study is especially powerful. People with current talents are in short supply worldwide and eagerly sought after wherever they reside. The globalization of people is driven by talent. There's increasing awareness, of course, that country strategies for education and for preparation in science and technology matter, because they have become the keys to developing an innovation-based economy, and because a prepared workforce attracts international investment. Innovation. Innovation is a major driver of the future and is widely touted as almost the answer to almost every question we have about how will we. How will we accelerate the economic development, create affordable health care, improve quality of life, control climate change, and so on? The answer is always through innovation. Creating cultures of innovation has become a local, regional, and national issue in every developed and developing country. Cultures of innovation increase partnerships and engagement between government, the private sector, and universities. Top-down innovation systems are government-driven, like in China and Singapore, and bottom-up innovation systems like the United States are private sector-driven. A fully integrated top-to-bottom innovation system has yet to be created, but some are working on it. Universities are natural centers for innovation and entrepreneurship. They gather talented people, engage in cutting-edge research, have large-scale information and communication systems, connect to local and global communities, engage in instruction, and provide innovation services, often with support by government and communities. Services such as an entrepreneur's residence hall, an incubator for startup companies, an international incubator for foreign companies, access to angel and venture funders, technology licensing and commercialization services, intellectual property protection services, venture acceleration assistance, business plan counseling and competition, venture mentors and consultants are just some of the elements you could have, and all of those exist at the University of Maryland. Students at universities start companies. In fact, they create entirely new lines of business, such as with Apple Computer, Microsoft, and Google. Universities are poised to expand their cultures of innovation to embrace a university-wide culture of innovation that would extend support to the community surrounding the university and beyond, including internationally. This is the next step in innovation at universities. Okay, let's see. The great global problems. The joining of national problems with the great global problems, such as environmental degradation and climate change, is a driver resulting from global connectivity. Great global problems have driven universities to become more globally focused. For instance, student attention is captured by Engineers Without Borders, an organization that takes on sanitation, alternative energy, and clean water projects in the underdeveloped world. Relief efforts and fundraising after national disasters like earthquakes and hurricanes reflect this mega trend. The global connectedness really has steeled our linkages to these global drivers, a major trend. So what are our responses to these trends? Well, the new environment has expanded responsibilities and opportunities for individuals in emerging and developing countries alike. Globally connected economies broaden opportunities for those with the talent. The high value of talent encourages individuals to think globally about their careers and opportunities. And individuals, on the contrary, that are not prepared for this global environment risk being left behind. Accordingly, education is of growing importance throughout the world. Corporations are basically, earlier notions of national corporations are really no longer generally relevant, though some do remain because of ties to government. Access to growing markets in developing countries, access to eager, available, and talented workforce pool, favorable cost considerations, favorable tax and regulatory structures, and other incentives encourage global expansion of multinational corporations. Global expansions are not free of problems, of course, but the trend towards a growing number of multinational corporations will continue as demand for goods and services and as markets expand, especially as the problems associated with them are ameliorated over time. Change is not new to universities. In fact, universities are the most persistent institutions in the history of man because they represent society's best mechanism for facilitating change. Change flows out of centers of learning into the greater society, as Confucius taught us 2,500 years ago. The increasing global partnerships and engagement of universities, especially research universities, must be brought into the education of their undergraduate national students and into the economic development of their local and national communities. Developing an understanding of the value of the research university in the global community is a key responsibility of its leadership. Research universities will be increasingly called on to aid in the developing of higher education systems throughout the world. This has long been true, but the expansion of higher education globally, coupled with the demand for the global competitiveness of universities, will result in increased expectations for capacity building by the most prestigious universities. So in what directions are universities moving? A summary of these points. The drivers of the future really paint a picture of expectations for research universities and their leadership over the near term. They include the following kind of 6 observations. First, universities will increasingly expand their global focus beyond teaching international students and partnering with foreign universities to include partnerships and engagement with foreign governments, with intergovernmental organizations, and with multinational corporations to provide special services, research, and even training. As universities enlarge their responsibilities globally, they must ensure their home base has a harmonious understanding of the values of global engagement. Research universities especially will have an increasingly global footprint. 2, universities will prepare their students to think globally. We heard a lot about this earlier today, and will facilitate international educational, research, and employment experiences to prepare them for global professional careers, responsibilities, and understandings. International experience should be the goal for every student prior to graduation. Talented students will experience expanding opportunities. Working around the world will be like working around the country was a generation ago. Third, universities will nurture global talent beyond the classroom, including leadership, management, current skills, instruction for professionals across disciplines through new degrees and certificate programs. These programs will facilitate understanding national culture as well as delivering the subject matter content. 4, innovation will be central to university planning and programs. Universities will become regional, if not national, centers for innovation and entrepreneurship, leading the development of communities around them and elsewhere. The world is hungry for innovation, which universities, with support of government, are positioned to provide. The university, beyond its business and engineering schools, will become more innovative in its teaching, research, and in its own operations. An innovative culture requires strong leadership, embraces institutional agility, commits to high-value deliverables, values disparate talents, adapts to changing circumstances, and responds to opportunities. 5th, universities will engage in the great global problems by partnering with other universities, institutions, and governments to engage multidisciplinary teams of students, faculty, and others. Competitions such as the U.S. Department of Energy Solar Decathlon, service projects like those of Engineers Without Borders, and the grand challenges, say, offered by the U.S. National Academy of Engineering, are exemplars of the kind of growing hands-on efforts to contribute to these great global problems. And 6th, traditional academic values will be enriched and strengthened, not sacrificed, including excellence and relevance in scholarship and research, diversity and inclusion, discovery and creativity, ethical behavior, civility and collegiality, openness and accountability. And finally, the challenge for leadership is to create a university vision that both fulfills its mission and recognizes the global drivers described above. And while institutional responsibilities vary, the research-oriented universities will likely confront most of the above-mentioned world drivers when formulating their vision and mission. Shaping the university culture so it can contribute maximally in the world today is the most important responsibility for university leadership. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President Dan Mott. Your talk about megatrends and response to them was quite interesting. Now, let me invite our third speaker, who's from UNESCO, Dr. Tang. Well, he talk about, well, in terms of, in view of focusing about the role of UNESCO, right? Thank you.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a great pleasure for me to be here to share our views with you, with this very diversified and influential group of people. Before I came here to prepare my presentation, I was given the topic as a sense of a global citizenship and a social responsibility. Let me share with you what is UNESCO's vision on this, and also what is UNESCO's role in today's global development of education. As you know, UNESCO's mission is to build peace through its 5 fields of competence: education, the natural and social sciences, culture, and communication. So today I would like to present to you some idea on how exactly through education we can promote dialogue between cultures, respect for others, and a sense of shared goals. First of all, let me take you back to 10 years ago, at year 2000. In that year, more than 1,000 decision makers, including head of states, minister of education, business leaders, and representative of non-governmental organizations, and grassroots education workers, they gathered in Dakar, Senegal, at the World Education Forum. They came up with a set of 6 goals in education to be achieved by the year of 2015. These goals, which are now was called as Education for All, or EFA goals, range from early childhood care and education through to life skills program for young people and adults, gender equality, and the quality of education. A process of monitoring international progress was established with the creation of the annual Global Monitoring Report, which is developed and published by an independent team at UNESCO. Now, what does the Global Monitoring Report tell us? Since 2000, there has been significant progress. There are fewer out-of-school children, and the likelihood of girls being enrolled in school has been significantly improved. Some countries have made very impressive progress in this area. For example, in Ethiopia and Tanzania, the proportion of children enrolled in primary education has doubled since 2000. While in Morocco, the number of out-of-school children declined by 67% between 1999 and 2007. We must celebrate this success, but at the same time, we must acknowledge that we still have a long way to go. Literacy, perhaps the greatest tool for individual empowerment in existence, has been relatively neglected by many countries. While the proven benefits of educational intervention in early childhood have not been seized, too much emphasis has been put on getting kids into classrooms without thinking about what type of education they should receive when they are there. Yes, as you know, education is not just about having the opportunity to watch a teacher demonstrate how to do long division on a blackboard. It is about individuals acquiring the competencies and the values that will allow them to pursue learning throughout life and contribute to building a more peaceful, tolerant, and democratic society. We firmly believe that achieving these goals require two main conditions: that governments and the stakeholders emphasize the quality of education, and then they take a holistic approach to education and lifelong learning that recognize the interconnection of each of the different levels and the settings of education. To these two conditions, I will add student mobility, which in our globalized world is becoming a vital tool for the promotion of international understanding. Let me turn first to quality. This is an issue that concerns all countries, rich and poor. The public interest in and a speedy government response to the publication of the OECD's PISA program demonstrate just how close this issue is to the heart of voters everywhere. Indeed, society has a major stake in the quality of education, which lies the basis for more peaceful, tolerant, equitable, and sustainable societies. It includes learning about universally shared values and behavior that promotes sustainable development. This is linked not only to curriculum, but also to the learning environment as a whole. We're talking about teachers, classroom facilities, teaching and learning materials. For this reason, UNESCO is currently developing a quality assurance framework together with our partners that education ministries and stakeholders in our member states will be able to use to assess the quality of their system and identify areas for improvement. Let me now turn to the holistic approach to education system development. This approach sees education and learning as a process that begins at birth and continues smoothly into childhood and adulthood. It may seem obvious, but we have seen the tendency that some donors are pushing the recipient countries to concentrate their resources and efforts on only one or two subsectors of education system. There's nothing wrong with establishing priorities, but given the interconnection of the different levels and the settings of education, with, for example, higher education feeding the preparation of teachers, primary education preparing students for secondary education, and the literacy for mothers promoting better early childhood care, given this linkage and even dependence of each of the levels and the settings on each other, the tendency of a beneficiary and the donor governments to concentrate their efforts on only one or two of them has weakened the whole education system. I give you an example. In last few years, or last 10 years something, some donors keep pushing, like say, African countries, when they develop their education system, they should focus on primary education, for example. But when I traveled to the African continent, meeting the ministers of education in many countries, they all told me we're not only needing primary education, literacy, we also need to develop our higher education system, because we also need to train our scientists, our medical doctors, our lawyers, etc., etc. So you can see all these developing countries, they realize the importance to have a holistic development of their education system. So that is what we say. We need the balanced development of our education system. As, for example, this forum is concerned with human resource development, and it's critical that we do not see this only being technical and vocational education training for the young and the adult people. Rather, by developing holistic, balanced education system for learning throughout life, with a clear articulation between the different levels and the settings, we will create a society which is able to adapt to new challenges of the labor market and to contribute to driving healthier and more sustainable economies. Now, finally, let me move to the issue of a global student mobility. Moving to other countries to study is as old as universities themselves, but this is the first time that the world is seeing student mobility in such numbers. In year 2007, UNESCO estimated that some 2.8 million students were educated outside their own countries. Never before we have been so well placed to use education to promote dialogue between our peoples and a sense of a global citizenship. However, in order to support this mobility, we must be able to ensure the quality of the qualification provided and their international recognition. For this reason, UNESCO oversees the implementation of 6 regional conventions on the cross-border recognition of studies, diploma, and degrees, as well as 1 inter-regional convention for the Mediterranean countries. Officially, these conventions serve to ensure that academic qualifications are recognized for the purpose of a later study. And unofficially, however, they can also help in ensuring that the potential employers recognize the qualification of these students. As our world becomes ever more integrated, we may question whether it may be necessary or useful to develop a universal convention to which all countries may become party countries. We can recognize the degrees and diplomas students get from other countries. Now, cooperation and not competition must be the basic nature of human resource development. So UNESCO is working with its member states to prepare, through education, young generations with global citizenship, whose values are those of a dialogue, respect, solidarity, and a commitment to peace, who are able to build more equitable societies based on the healthier and more sustainable economies. To conclude, allow me to say a few words about the excellent cooperation between UNESCO and your country, the Republic of Korea, in the field of education. The leaders of your country keep telling us, some 50 years ago, after the Korean War, UNESCO helped Korea to build its education system, which they make the solid basis for the economic miracle happened later on in this country. They're telling us that now Korea is an OECD country. Now it's our time, or our turn, to team up with UNESCO to help other developing countries to develop their education system, to help them to alleviate their poverty and for development goals. I would say this is a good example of a sense of a global citizenship and a social responsibility. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Tang. Well, I think your talk reminds us what we have to do in education as a global citizen. Thank you very much. And well, now let us move to our final speaker. Well, she's from the World Bank, Dr. Elizabeth King. She's also going to talk about the education and the global change, global challenges.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, distinguished participants, and co-panelists. Let me thank the organizers and the government of Korea for this wonderful invitation to be a part of this amazing conference, amazing discussion and debate around the issues related to human resource development. Certainly a very topical issue. For a few minutes, join me in thinking about the future, in particular the next 10 years. What will the world look like? And I think several of the panelists today were all already doing that, although we were warned not to be too specific about our sense of the future. But in looking at the future and the topic of this forum, we would like to be able to look at what will be the demand on workers and what will be the demand on education and training systems of the future. And therefore, to examine how the world might be changing. First of all, let me start with demographics. Almost 90% of the world's population will be living in today's less developed countries by 2050. So we see here over 50 years how much more of the population of the world will be living in the less developed and also the poorest countries. And if you're familiar with what the map of the world looks like, this does not look like it. And the reason for that is that this map of the world reflects where the biggest populations would be. And you can see immediately that the shape of Africa looks different because of the high increase in the population. And also take a look at South Asia, also again because of the population. And then look at North America and South America, which are shrinking. And that's because the population will be shrinking. And for our purposes, for the forum, let's look at the world's young population, those who are ages 0 to 14. What we find is that most of that population will be living in the least developed countries. So not only the less developed countries, but the least developed countries. Just in terms of looking in aggregate at the low-income countries and also the middle-income countries, what we see is that in the future, high dependency ratios in the low-income countries, with adults having to take care of more children. In fact, if this pyramid here, the red pyramid, shows that more than 40% of the population in low-income countries will be below the age of 15. And therefore, also the tax base will be smaller in those countries, and therefore the affordability of education and training. Something that we were discussing starting this morning is the rise of new economic stars and how that's changing the global economy, but also changing global politics. The rise, for example, of China, such that not very long ago, the GDP of China had actually surpassed the GDP of Japan, which was the second largest economy until then. And this continued growth in less developed countries is going to change, in fact, continue to change the relative sizes of the economy. And this table just shows that if you were thinking about the U.S. and using that as the reference point, and in 2007, and 2050, still using the U.S. as the reference point, we see that China, which was in 2007 was only 23% in a way of the size of the U.S., will be by 2050 predicted to be more than the size of the U.S. So these are what we see as rapid changes of the emerging economic stars is really changing the way the distribution of the world product is going to be in the next decades. The good news, another piece of good news is with this growth, the world has achieved a big decline in poverty. Just take a look at these numbers, these curves. We see here a big decline in the percent of the population living on less than $2 a day in sub-Saharan Africa as well as in South Asia, and therefore changing really the picture of poverty in the world. But we see here the most dramatic change was really in East Asia. And much of that change was really a product of China's success in reducing its own poverty rates. Again, something that's been mentioned by my co-panelists is also the change in the use of the information technologies. Very rapid growth in mobile telephony and also in internet use. And we see here that in terms of mobile cellular telephone subscriptions, per 100 inhabitants in the world, 67 out of every 100 are actually have mobile subscriptions. So all of these various changes are aggregate mega trends, I think was the phrase used by my co-panelists, are going to be changing also the role of education and training in reducing poverty, in promoting development, and improving lives. I want to quote 3 world leaders about with respect to what they say the role of education will be. So in Korea, since this is where we are, President Lee Myung-bak in 2009 said, education is the only means to sever the vicious cycle of poverty. The best welfare is to dole out opportunities for education and jobs. He says, my only wish is to encourage those who have difficulties in educating their children and help the educated children land a job. President Obama of the United States says, not too long ago, even as we focus on speeding up our economic recovery, we also know that when it comes to jobs, opportunity and prosperity in the 21st century, nothing is more important than the quality of our education at a time when most of the new jobs being created will require some kind of higher education. When countries that out-educate us today will out-compete us tomorrow, giving our kids the best education possible is an economic imperative. And lastly, from across the sea, from President Hu Jintao of China, again this year, said, the education cause must be treated as a strategic mission and priority in the country's overall development plan. So world leaders are thinking like us in terms of the role of education, the role of human resources development. So I just want to say a few words about two challenges. Especially with the the world economic downturn, jobs and work skills are on the lips of everyone, in particular, and the minds of world leaders. There's a lot of research that shows that education improves earnings, improves income. I just cite one particular number from research. 1 additional year of education increases an individual's wage by 5 to 10%. And again, several of us have already been looking at the importance of skills as we look at the economies of countries in the future. Skills are a constraint for enterprises. These are the results of enterprise surveys. The proportion of firms identifying labor skills level as a major constraint from the Middle East, you can see that 39% of the firms in this survey, to in the OECD, 11%. Again, as economies develop, the types of skills demanded will be changing. This is the result of just one study by professors at Harvard, showing that in the future, the firms will be requiring more non-routine analytic and non-routine interactive skills rather than non-routine manual or routine cognitive skills. That complex skills are going to be needed. These are responses from to the European Survey of Working Conditions. And the question was, does your main job involve, 1, solving unforeseen problems, learning new things, and so forth, and monotonous tasks at the end? And what we see here is that the EU, the richer EU members, as well as the new EU members, are saying that indeed the workplace is going to be needing the ability of workers to solve unforeseen problems and learning new things and adapting to change. Firms will be using new information technologies. So the new information technologies are not only going to be affecting the way our children learn, they will be affecting the jobs. And you can see that from your own jobs, our jobs, the way that has changed, they have changed over the past decade or two. And this graph just shows the proportion of firms that are already using email to communicate with both clients and suppliers. And recently I also saw some numbers with respect to the use of farmers of mobile telephony to find out more information about climate, about weather, and about prices of agricultural goods. So knowledge is going to make a difference between those who are poor and those who are not poor. And again, here we see an example from Korea, and with Ghana as, in this case, as the reference point. And the big difference in terms of GDP per capita being attributed either to one to knowledge and then the other one to physical and human capital. And you see here a big share that's being attributed to the knowledge gain in Korea. The impact of in-service training on firm productivity. Again, what we see here over just looking at different countries, that you have big differences across countries, but certainly up to 70% in Pakistan will be of increases in firm productivity is being attributed to in-service training. Let me just pass over this because I think our panelists have certainly said a lot of things about innovation. I wanted to just spend a moment on this graph. This is from work that I've done recently with a couple of co-authors, we were looking at the returns to schooling, because we are in this forum talking about the importance of investments in human resource development. And what our research is showing is that the supply of skills is not the only thing that's important. We work in a way, an ecosystem, in an environment that is affected both by economic rules and policies, as well as also by political conditions. And what we were finding out is that, and something that is certainly echoes something that a Nobel Prize winner of the 70s, Theodore Schultz, said, is that the returns to education, the returns to skills are higher, in fact, when the society, the economy, allows more freedom to individuals. And that's what we were showing, and we found through recent research. So let me say something about climate change, something that my co-panelists I don't think mentioned, but what was mentioned this morning during a couple of the introductions. Again, this is an issue that is occupying the minds of many world leaders. And climate change is an issue, a global issue that threatens all countries. And you see from this graph, the red, the countries that are colored in red are those who are going to be, whose agricultural yields will be depressed in 2050 because of climate change. Developing countries are going to be the most vulnerable to extreme weather conditions. According to estimates, they would bear 80% of the costs of damages caused by climate change. And even as small as 2 degrees centigrade warming could result in permanent reductions in GDP of 4 to 5% for Africa and South Asia. And I mention this here because this is one of the areas that I think we're hoping human resources development will be able to affect. This is the result of a very recent research by people at the Center for Global Development who were looking at the various factors that are associated with predictions about the impact of extreme weather losses. And when they were looking at this in terms of the historical numbers, what they find are these. So you have here two graphs, two lines for each graph, where the red one is the historical one, and the blue lines below the red ones are the result of simulations. And what they were doing was to try to predict what would have happened had, in this case, women in these countries had more education. And so what they're finding is that countries where women have more education were actually more resilient to weather conditions. So countries with female education, higher female education, coped with extreme weather events better than the other countries. And some of the reasons for that, well, more information about, in fact, about the importance of practices, of the use of the natural environment. Also, better choices, more responsible lifestyle choices. And the third is just better coping strategies that are positively associated with higher education. Lastly, again, something that I think was not mentioned today so far, I think, but I think needs to be mentioned is we are living also in a world where there is more conflict and also more natural disasters. There are countries in the less developed world who are facing the most extreme challenges with respect to the impact of political conflict, civil wars, violence, and natural disasters. We ask ourselves, as we think about the benefits for the economy of education and human resources development, about what is it going to be like in those countries. Fragile states are the least likely to meet the Millennium Development Goals. These are the countries, I said, which are affected by conflict and natural disasters. For these reasons, because of very long wars and very long conflicts, they are defined by weak governance and weak institutions. In the World Bank, we're defining 35 states under this category with nearly 400 million people. And their conflicts, their fragility has impact beyond borders. The reason, certainly, to think more about these conditions and to help them, to give some support. And I think the challenges of these most fragile countries pose a dilemma for the development community. I won't go into this table, hard to see probably from the back, but in these countries, 27% of the extreme poor in the world are in these countries. A third of the child deaths that have been counted by the World Health Organization are in these countries. A third of the children not in school or not going to be completing primary school, and a quarter of the population that's HIV positive are in this population. So this, I think, as we think about wealth and prosperity of many of the developing countries that are emerging, we need to also think about these countries that are in much greater trouble. And I realize that I need to go faster here. Just to echo something that was said, we've seen significant progress in education for all, even in low-income countries, with respect to net enrollment rates, primary completion rates, and also an increasing pressure on secondary and tertiary education. And I think this is the point that my co-panelist from UNESCO was saying, that the balanced education sector makes sense. But large disparities remain within countries. So I would also like to show that, in fact, within the countries, even within the emerging economic stars, there are segments of the population that are left behind. And so thinking about who these are. In Nigeria, for example, right from the beginning, the poorest 20% of the population don't go to school. Different in Indonesia, where the poorest 20% of kids are able to go to school and then later drop out of school. So we need to think about the poorest in these countries, and poverty shows in different ways. And again, something that was mentioned, not enough learning. Significant increases in enrollment rates and in completion rates, but not enough learning. Not enough, certainly, to be able to have skills that are good for both life and work. Both in terms of the test scores in math as well as in reading scores. Just some figures to show the big difference across countries, with Korea here on the very right side quite high, and a lot of other countries that have to achieve much better learning. And here again, I would like to stress the importance of thinking about the poor in the population. If the schools that are available for the poorest children in Turkey and Thailand were as good as the schools for the richest children, Turkey and Thailand would actually rank alongside the US average. I think that is the reason for thinking about the problems of the poor. So I just want to remind us all, a country's wealth and its prospects for development depends on the quality of its people, the skills and creativity of its workers, the capability of its leaders to govern well and to manage its resources, to be good stewards of the natural environment, and the ability of the adult generation to raise healthy, educated, and happy children. This is the next generation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Elizabeth King. Well, indeed, it was very nice to hear from the education director of World Bank. Well, I thought that, World Bank is bank and only concerns about economy, but we have education director. It was very nice to hear from you. Well, I just informed that we have 4 minutes more, so I would like to take from the floor 1 or 2 questions regarding the education or future. Okay, go ahead. The third line, the lady, okay.
I'm Myung-Suk Bang from Caris. My question goes to Dr. Weber. 2 questions. The terminology, the natural authority. You mentioned that should be created by specialists and leaders. I'd like to understand, I'd like to have a little bit more elaboration about the concept. And second, you mentioned about rigidity in curriculum of higher education. I'd like to hear what have you shown to solve this rigidity in curriculum of higher education in your university as a way of showing your natural authority. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for both questions. I don't think I will elaborate on the first one. As you have understood, my English is not my mother tongue or native tongue, and maybe I haven't used exactly the right expression. But the second one regarding rigidity, as a university leader, we all have to fight, to push, to pull to make sure that departments, faculties, schools, whatever the organization of the university is moving along, is trying both to be responsive to the changing world, but at the same time to be responsible, to lead the change somehow. It's why it's a very delicate balance between the two. And unfortunately, at least in Europe, and I don't know, in the US, sometimes our colleagues or other instructors are too much focused on their own interests. We say they are more faithful to their discipline. They prefer maybe to be keynote speaker at the annual meeting of the Physical Society than to do something for their university or to change the way they act. And it's really a big problem. You know, there's a very big joke. It's more difficult to change the university than to move a cemetery, because people inside don't contribute much. That was exactly my point. And you know that you have the same problem in firms and of course also in state or state institutions. We have entered in a world of change, where change is really the most stable factor. And if universities don't adapt to this changing world, they will be out of the game. And more now that there are other possibilities to get knowledge within firms, through internet, through distance learning, and so on. And clearly, that's a very important factor over the last 30, 50 years with the development of ICT, that the monopoly position of universities has decreased.
Sure.
That's a very good question. I appreciate very much Dr. Weber's analysis. I heard the cemetery joke a slightly different way. Being the president of a university is like being the caretaker at a cemetery, because there are a lot of people underneath you, but nobody is listening. The issue about rigidity is a very key one, and I think there is a couple of points of guidance I would just suggest. If you ask for change starting at the basic unit level, departmental level, you'll almost never get change, because as Dr. Weber said, the interests are so entrenched and there's no motivation for them to change. So the strategy is to change the whole university, not the department. So you start at the university level, president level. You have a board of wide-ranging faculty and others and leadership and other universities, and you redesign the entire university. That's the way you do this. And you create a strategic plan for 10 years for the university, which then maps out the global trends, where the universities need to be positioned, how it's going to compete in the country and in its neighbors and so forth, where it wants to be and how it's going to get there. And you essentially set a whole new design for where you're going to go in 10 years. And you bring everybody on board, every student, every staff member, every faculty member, all the alumni, the community. It's a very big process, but that way you can create a momentum that in fact it cannot be resisted by small minds and voices inside. They become overwhelmed by essentially an excitement and opportunity to do something great. You do this by building opportunity. People have to see opportunity for themselves to do something really interesting. But it never works starting at the bottom end. You just get rigidity.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Tang or Dr. King, do you have any further comments to make? Okay, then I think I have to conclude my session. During this session, I heard really many times that the world is changing. And this reminds me what Charles Darwin says. Well, in his famous theory, survival of the fittest, he says, it is not the strongest that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is the most adaptable to change. well, that may be true. So, particularly for education, we have to find a way to adapt occurring, in this changing society. So, and I think during this session, we have at least tried to find a way to adapt, to change that occurring. So I would like to thank you again for all the participants, audiences, and the speakers. And well, would you join me? Could you join me for appreciating for their interesting talks? Thank you very much.